You know, when Mary printed this for me yesterday, she said it's too long, and I threw a page away. And this morning at 5 o'clock, I got it out of the recycle bin. Just so you know.
Thanks, Kim.
The golden rule, right? How cool. Do to others as you would have them do to you. That's what Jesus tells us. Before that, in another religion, we had the silver rule. Do you remember that one? I've shared that with you before. It comes from Confucius. And the silver rule, anybody remember? Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. Okay, act like you've never heard it. But how much nicer and kinder and more generous is Jesus' golden rule? Yeah. And so I want to share two contemporary stories with you, neither of which came out of the recycle bin. One is a story, the story of the Fisher King. Do you remember that movie? Robin Williams starred in it years ago. But in that movie, there's a young boy, and he is to become king. But to prove he's courageous, he has to go spend time in the forest by himself for a night. And so he goes into the forest, and while he's in the forest, he has a vision. And the vision is of the Holy Grail, which is a symbol of God's grace for us. And he's staring into the fire when this vision appears, this Holy Grail. And he knows it's supposed to be about God's love and grace, but he somehow gets in this trance where he starts thinking about power and glory instead of love and grace. And so he reaches into the fire to take the Holy Grail, and he cannot grab it, but his hand is terribly burned, and so he has this wound for his whole life. As time goes on, he becomes more wounded, if you will. His wound grows sorer and doesn't heal, and his spirit and soul seem to as well. He can neither find love, nor give love, nor accept love. And it says in the movie that he begins to die. So he's in his castle by himself, and a fool wanders in. And the fool looks at him and he says, "Oh, what's wrong with you?" Because he could see that he wasn't well. And the king says, "I'm so thirsty. I just need a drink of water." And so the fool finds a cup next to where the king is sitting. He fills it with water, and he gives it to the king. And the king is healed. And he realizes his wound is healed. And as he looks at his hands, the one which was wounded and the other, in his hands is the Holy Grail that he had sought his whole life. And he turns to the fool and he says, "How can you find that which my brightest and bravest could not?" And the fool says, "I don't know. I only knew that you were thirsty." To me, that story speaks of the golden rule and of Scripture. The other story is a true story. It's about a neurosurgeon named Carlton Armstrong. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. But I'm not sure where it appeared. I found it in my notes from years ago. But it's the story of a little girl named Tess. And her brother Andrew has probably what we would think of as a brain tumor. So Tess goes into her bedroom and she reaches to the top shelf of her closet and she takes down her piggy bank. And she counts out all the coins in it. She has $1.11. She puts on her shoes and she walks to the Rexall drugstore. Anybody have a Rexall drugstore? Remember those? And she thinks if she talks to the pharmacist, she'll be able to buy a Miracle for her brother. So she stands there at the counter, and he's talking to another man. So she decides she'll scuff her feet on the floor, see if that gets his attention, but it doesn't. So then she decides she'll clear her throat and see if that gets his attention, but it doesn't. So she does what any enterprising young woman would do. She takes a quarter out of the jar and starts tapping it on the counter until he notices. And he's annoyed with her. And he says, "Can't you see I'm talking to my brother? He's here from Chicago." And she says, "Well, I need to talk to you about my brother." And he says, "What do you want?" And she says, "Well, my baby brother has this terrible thing going on in his head, and my daddy said he needs surgery, but daddy doesn't have the money for this surgery, for this operation. So I need to know how much a Miracle costs." And the pharmacist looks at her and he goes, "Well, I'm sorry, I can't help you." And he actually does soften a little bit at that point. He feels sorry for her. But the guy standing with him, who happens to be Dr. Carlton Armstrong, bends over and he gets at her level and he says to her, "Well, how much money do you have?" And she said, "I have $1.11. It's all I have." And he said, "You are blessed." He said, "You know what? That is exactly the cost of a miracle." He said, "Tell me what's wrong with your brother again." And she says, "Well, there's something going on in his head, and my daddy said he needs an operation that he can't afford." He says, "Well, I think I can take care of that miracle." He takes her $1.11, and he takes her little mittened hand, and he says, "Now you need to show me where your house is. You need to go visit your mommy and your daddy and your little brother." You probably know how the story's going to end. He does indeed take Andrew, the baby brother's case, pro bono. He operates, the operation is successful, and Andrew returns home. And the mother and father are talking about it afterwards. And the mother says to the father, "Gosh, I wonder how much that cost." She said, "It was such a miracle, but I don't know how much it cost. How could he give us that gift?" And Tess, who's the little girl, says, "I know how much it costs. It costs everything you have." And again, I think the story is about the golden rule. When we look at Luke's story here, did you notice it was the Beatitudes in short form? When you read them in Matthew, there are 8. But when you get to Luke, there are 4. Kim, that should make you happy. And they're very personal in Luke. If you go back and you were to read the Beatitudes in Matthew's Gospel, you will hear things like, it depends on how they're translated. Sometimes it says happy are and sometimes it says blessed are. Here it says blessed are in Luke. But typically in Matthew it says, happy are they who are. Happy are they who are. But if you look at this one, it says, blessed are you. And the Bible commentators tell us that Jesus is at this time talking not only to his disciples, but also to some other folks that have gathered there. So he's talking to his intimate circle as well as the larger circle of people that have come to hear him talk and preach and teach. And he says, blessed are you who are poor. And see, all the commentators struggle with this. Because in Matthew it says, blessed are you who are, do you remember? Poor in spirit. It doesn't say that here. So is that another elliptical exclusion, you know, something that was just left out with an ellipsis, dot, dot, dot. I was gonna put that in, but I didn't, because I'm trying to keep it short for Kim. Did Luke know that? Blessed are you who are hungry now. Blessed are you who weep now. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Humanity. We think he's talking to his disciples about what is happening and what will continue to happen to them as they try to go out and proclaim to folks who've never heard it, the good news of God's love for us. We think that's what's happening. He goes on, and you know, he does the woe is, woe are you, and I think he's really, again, he's addressing the audience he has in front of him. And so I don't think we can just take that and say, oh, he's saying those who, you know, had a really good dinner last night, well, you're gonna be hungry later, because honestly, we all know that's true. But he's not saying if you're rich, you're not. He's just kind of saying, don't forget the rest of the people. Because I really think what he means is, woe are you if you are only focused on yourself and what satiates you. Because we know so many people to whom that does not apply. But I want to move really to the last part of the reading that leads to the golden rule. And he says this at the end. I say to you that listen. He's asking us to listen. To you that listen. Maybe he thinks other people aren't listening, but to you that listen, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. If you've ever been hated or cursed at or abused, and I don't use those terms lightly, you know how difficult a challenge this is. And he ends with, do to others as you would have them do to you. That's the message he's really trying to get across. Treat others the way you want to be treated, and it's not these things I just said. Here's the page I rescued from the recycle bin. There are only 4 check marks on it, so I'm not reading the whole page. It's from Caroline Lewis, and she's a wonderful Bible scholar and professor. And she says, the Beatitudes are words for times such as these. As anti-beatitude living becomes more acceptable, these words call out to us, and they call us out of our complacency and conformity. Did we stop thinking about being complacent and conforming? Sometimes I think I do. She says, as we continue to experience the effects of national and global trauma, of natural and human-made disasters, these are words to believe in, to count on, and to trust. As the church contends that it is a place of safety and refuge, and then turns away those who have nowhere else to go, these words point out the charade. I think she's just trying to call us to see that these words are very challenging words. They're not meant to lure, kind of lure us into being complacent. Just go, oh, yeah, I do that. No, they're calling us all the time. If we have eyes to see and ears to hear. I went to Winn-Dixie this week, several times. I don't go to Wawa anymore. And there's a man that sits there with his cart and his sign and his weather-beaten face and his unshaven beard and his dirty little ball cap. So I bought him a Winn-Dixie gift card because I thought, it's food or it's beer and cigarettes. And I drove over to where he was sitting, and he came over to the car. And I can't imagine there's anybody in here who does not have this experience, that when you give somebody who is truly hungry and homeless a tiny little gift of your time and your wealth, they always say what to you?
God bless you.
God bless you. God bless you. Who's the saint? Isn't one the saint just waiting to be recognized as saint? And the other one just the poor fool who wanders in and says, I saw you were hungry. That's all Jesus asks us. That we see and we hear and we respond. The last thing I want to share with you is something I wrote a couple of years ago. It's called Why Tears Matter, and it's an All Saints Day reflection. And I hope that's okay, Kim, if I take a few minutes to do this. But it begins, when I was a child, I was taught that saints were either extraordinary, superhuman people, or people that suffered such terribly horrible, whatever, frightening deaths that they became saints. Did y'all have that? I almost brought in, I have this statue, it still sits on my bookcase at home, and it's a statue of St. John Chrysostom. I don't know if you ever heard of him, I didn't, but my mother got it for me, and it's St. John Chrysostom with a crown of thorns and blood coming down his face, and I looked at it when she gave it to me, and I said, Mom, why did you give me this statue? Was it on sale somewhere? And she said to me, oh, Kath, because it reminds me of you. I'm like, oh, okay. But that was kind of the images we had as saints. And even, when I would go on retreats when I was in the convent, they would read the lives of the saints and martyrs. And you would be in a silent meal, eating a very simple meal, typically vegetarian, listening to these people who died these horrible, horrifying, torturous deaths. And I'm like, no wonder everybody in this little place is skinny. How could you possibly eat listening to these things? But that was my understanding of saints. Either they were these superhuman beings, or there were these people that had these torturous things happen to them, and then they were killed. Okay? But then childhood passed, and I started to see tears in other places. And I remember it was a couple of years ago, I saw this story on television. There was a dad, and for whatever reason, he was outside his son's school. And the buses were coming, so I don't know if he was working the bus line, helping the teachers. I don't know what he was doing, but anyway, he was there. And this truck rams into the school bus in front of it. And the driver of the truck runs out with guns at the children. And he saw it happening, this dad, so he gathered all the kids closest to him and he got them all back safely into the school. And after he did, he went and got his own son. They interviewed him on television and they said, well, do you think of yourself as a hero? And he had tears in his eyes. And he said, I don't think of myself as a hero. I think of myself as that person who would do the same thing if it were my son that was in danger. Do unto others. I'm going to read some of the rest just because it could get really, really long and I get in trouble. Although blessed are those whom others revile, just so you know. When I see a son or brother or aunt or daughter or parent or grandparent or friend in tears, whether running down their cheeks or streaming down their hearts, because someone lost to them or about to be lost to them was just the best mother, father, sister, brother, daughter, son, grandson, granddaughter, niece, nephew, aunt, uncle, or friend. I know that that person has gone home to God, was a saint to the one left behind in tears. When I see a child fighting cancer and smiling through all the procedures and pain, and you know who I'm talking about, or a child losing family, home, and all else they've known to a natural disaster, and yet reaching out in trust that belies belief to a rescue worker's outstretched hand, or a child disowned and cast off, left to sleep on his father's back porch, and I heard it from the child himself tell us at one of the meetings I attended with Nancy and Lefty and P-Flag people. Or sleeping on friends' couches because these children did not fit their family's expectations of them or for them. I know I'm in the presence of those with the hearts of saints. When I see a person on the corner with a sign and a look of shame and hopelessness, and another who stops the car, rolls down the window, and shares a bottle of water, a sandwich, or just a word of encouragement, I know I have seen one saint hoping for another to recognize them, and another doing what Jesus so wants us all to do when he tells us that such an act of kindness to one of his beloved children in need reverberates throughout the kingdom of God. Then there's you. Remember? Today's message was directed to you, not they. When you take the time to find your child from Puerto Rico a new coat at a clothing giveaway, remember that?
I do.
When you make sandwiches to hand out to people on their way home from church, when you clean out your closet, leaving yourself 3 pairs of shoes and giving away the other 12, when you buy food for those who hunger so another can gather it for someone she knows whose children or parents are hungry. When you spend an hour to shop for the children's hospital treasure chest. We have a thank you note hanging on the wall in hospitality today. When you take the list of school supplies each August and shop for the children who would otherwise begin school without them, and you shop for them as if they were your own children, whether or not you have any. When you buy new clothes for the beginning of school or toys for Christmas for the children whose families live in cars in our neighborhoods. When you come and bring your gift and lay it on God's altar after you have reconciled with your sister or brother. Know that's all God asks. When you do any of this for the least, the last, and the lost, you bring tears to the eyes of those who know you, to the eyes of those who will never meet you, and to the eyes of God. And so for all saints, we give thanks. And on All Saints' Day, as we remember those who have gone before us, and home to the arms of God, and every single one that you mentioned today is home in the arms of God. No place else, no matter who else told you something else. we know that tears matter. Tears shed because of us and for us. Remember one of those you mentioned that you've lost, and think about the times they shed tears for you, for whatever reason. Tears about which we will never know, and tears that bring us closer to God, and God closer to us. We know that all tears matter. So if today you remember your saints, and I hope we do, those who passed long ago, a little bit ago, or those who are newly minted, and the memory of their love brings tears to your eyes, know what good company you keep, and see God smiling through God's own tears for love of you and your beloved.
Scott, would you lead